Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Oakland Aviation Museum. I'm your docent, Dan, and we're here at the north field of the Oakland International Airport in Alameda, California. Today is a very special day, May 13th, because this is Top Gun Day. 35 years ago today was the release of the movie Top Gun, featuring an actor by the name of Tom Cruise. Maybe you've heard of him. But the real star of the movie was the aircraft behind me, the Grumman F-14A Tomcat. The Tomcat is a supersonic, all-weather, twin-engine, two-seat, variable swept-wing interceptor fighter. During its active service in the United States Navy between 1972 and 2006, the F-14 Tomcat was the Navy's primary maritime air superiority fighter and a tactical reconnaissance platform. But today is an even more special day because we are actually being joined by a live guest or two online who will be talking about this aircraft. Our first guest is a former naval aviator who flew this very type of aircraft, the F-14A, Lieutenant Commander Tim Byrne. He's going to be giving us many details and insider stories of the Tomcat from a pilot's perspective. I'm going to turn the camera around, and then we're going to be walking around the aircraft, and then we'll just tell stories about it and explain to people what they're looking at. First, tell people about yourself and what got you acquainted with this fantastic airplane here.
Outstanding. Well, my name is Tim Byrne. I flew the Tomcat in the Navy from about 1989 to 1996. I did 11 years in the Navy total. I have about 1,000 hours in the A4 and 1,000 hours in the Tomcat. Great airplane, loved it every minute of it. I was born and raised in California, went to school at Arizona State University, went to what is called AOCS, Aviation Officer Candidate School. If you've ever seen Officer and a Gentleman, the movie, that's where I went to. So I was one of those 90-day wonders. I got out of college. 90 days later, I was a ensign in the U.S. Navy, learned to fly in Pensacola, flew T-34 Charlies there, went on to Beeville, Texas, flew T-2s, then A4s. I stayed in Beeville for another year and a half and taught Navy students. And I was what is called a surgrad, a selectively retained graduate. So if you were in the top third of your class, you could stay back and teach. Some people enjoyed it, some not so much, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a chance for me. I was one of the youngest Navy pilots at the time. I was 21, had my wings in the Navy already. I graduated college in 3 years and then stayed back, taught for a year and a half, got about 1,000 hours in the A4, and then went out to San Diego right at the time that Top Gun came out. So that was kind of fun. Wow. Got out to San Diego and went through VF-124, learning how to fly the F-14. That lasted almost a year. That is a TA-4J, and I flew that one for about about 1,000 hours. Beautiful airplane, very fun to fly.
Yeah, this is actually the type of airplane that was flown by the Blue Angels before they got the F-A-18.
Yep.
And it's such a nimble airplane. But one of the reasons I'm walking over this is not only because you said you've got so many hours in this too, but also the A4, take a look at this wing here. Looks like a pretty big airplane. But what I want you to remember is that the size of this whole A4 wing, that entire wing is the size of just the stabilizer on the tail of the Tomcat.
Yeah.
It gives you an idea of just how huge this airplane is. I used to call it the aluminum cloud. It's so big.
Yeah, the A4 was called the scooter because it was about the size of a scooter. One thing nice about the A4, when you were flying that, it was like really flying. Small wings, the cockpit was far forward of the wing. Couldn't see anything behind you other than the ground. It was pretty amazing. And then I went out to San Diego and learned to fly the Tomcat in the Fleet Replacement Squadron, VF-124. But there about 1 year, and then we went to VF-154, which is the Black Knights, hence the shirt, and went out to Japan. So I flew F-14s in Japan. We were the first F-14 squadron in Japan on the USS Independence. I was out there almost 5 years, did 4.5 cruises, got about 600 traps, 200 at just over 200 at night, and about 400 in the daytime.
Wow.
Yeah. Beautiful airplane, a lot of fun to fly.
They measured the pulse rate and all the vital signs of pilots in various stages of flight, including combat. They said that the time that's most stressful for pilots is the landing on the carrier.
Well, the pretty amazing thing is the first time you land a Tomcat on the ship, You're doing it for real by yourself with a guy in the back seat who's just watching. He has no flight controls or anything. The daytime is not too bad. It's the airplane handles well. It's a big airplane though, 72-foot wingspan, and the landing area is only about 80 feet wide. So you only have about 6 feet on each side, left and right of center line. Plus you're moving at 140 miles an hour. Plus the carrier itself is moving away from you and to the right at the same time. So the whole way down, you're chasing lineup to the right. So you sit there and do this the whole way down. During the daytime, it actually becomes a lot of fun. We call it breaking the deck. You come in overhead the ship as fast as you can go. You come into the break in usually a 2-ship and you land. You come around, land on the ship, and they'll land 15, 20 airplanes and not a word is spoken on the radio. It's pretty amazing. All of that is done just by visually looking at the other airplanes, making your own interval on each airplane in front of you and getting it right. If you get it wrong, believe me, somebody will tell you. And then at night though, you do what we call a pattern. You're stacked behind the ship out at 20 miles behind the ship. And each airplane is 1,000 feet. The very first one is at 5,000 feet. Then there's one at 6,000 feet. And you just sit there and turn circles in the sky waiting. And when they tell you to come down, the very first guy at 5,000 feet starts down towards the ship. And no matter how many times you've done it, it's pretty scary at night. There were times after landing that your knees would be shaking so hard, it was hard to move the airplane on the ship because you actually, the brakes are on the top of the rudder pedals. So to steer, you just simply braked one way or the other and the airplane would turn. Well, if your knees are shaking so bad, sometimes it was actually hard to turn the airplane. And there are even people who would just shut down the airplane right there and they would come up and tow it out of the way. Nighttime was always a challenge. It was always an interesting thing. The Tomcat was a little bit underpowered, especially compared to the Hornet when flying around the ship. Plus you have the giant lifting body, those giant wings. You actually don't have any, if you know anything about airplanes, how do airplanes turn? With ailerons. So there are no ailerons on the Tomcat. It didn't turn with those. It used those giant stabilizers you can see in back. One would go up and one would go down. Well, every time one goes up and one goes down, the airplane doesn't just turn, the nose moves left and right. So as you're trying to land on the ship, every time you made a lineup correction, your nose actually, and that was one of the ways the Tomcat also got its name, because it would look like this coming down sometimes, especially at night. They called it the turkey. You could just see it doing this all the way down. And you could tell somebody was having a rough night the more they moved around.
And there are all sorts of other control surfaces on here that can take the responsibility off of what would have been ailerons. You've got spoilers on the top of the wing. I don't know if you can see those here, but across the top of the wing, there are 3 spoilers, which can be deployed at lower bank angles to help. And then you've got a split flap here. You have an outboard flap here, and then you've got an inboard flap when the wing is fully forward.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, that's a amazing story about landing on a carrier, because I'm sure it's like water, 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 steel.
Yeah, you really see nothing but what's in front of you, the lineup. And I'll tell you one thing, you've never seen dark like you've seen in the middle of the ocean. It's on land, it's just not as dark. It never is. And boy, you can get out on a black night in the middle of the ocean and literally can't see the hand in front of your face. It's pretty amazing.
So this specific Tomcat was delivered to the VF-111 on the 16th of June of 1978. And she did a couple of Westpac cruises on the USS Kitty Hawk, it's the aircraft carrier. And its first tour was from about May 1979 to February 1980. And that brought the ship and the squadron to the Arabian Sea off of Iran. And then it went off and it provided cover just to observe the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Then had another tour in 1981 with Kitty Hawk. And then the USS Carl Vinson was stationed in Alameda. This plane was also still with the F-111 Sundowners and was part of the 1986-87 Westpac. And then on the 26th of March, 1987, this specific airplane flew the historic 1 millionth flight out of F-14As. So just an idea of how much kerosene these F-14s had burned. Back then it was called Old Nick or 666. And then in 1989, she was transferred to VF-21, where they renamed her Damien because the Bureau number, that's the Bureau number of the aircraft, which is unique to every airplane, is 160666. And so they called her Damien. And she served there until the late 1990s. And she came here in the late 90s. And then back in 2004, she landed on an aircraft carrier one more time in 2004. And that carrier was the Hornet. Of course, she didn't do it under her own power. She was lifted by a crane for a movie crew that was using her to be in the movie Triple X State of the Union. And you can see her in the background when they blow the tank off of the catapult, off of the Hornet. So this is quite a movie star. So now let's walk around and talk a little bit more about this specific airplane here. This is what she used to look like back in the prime of her life, back when she had the Sundowner paint scheme on before VF-21. This plane was designed to basically do one thing. That originally was to defend the fleet from attack from enemy bombers. And to do that, they invented a missile called the AIM-54 Phoenix. This could carry 6 of them at a time. So tell us a bit about the Phoenix missile and what it could do.
Well, the entire airplane was literally designed around the radar, the AWG-9, the original radar in it, was by far the largest airborne fighter radar ever developed, 36 inches across, huge radar. And that radar was specifically built to shoot the Phoenix missile system. The Phoenix missile is the largest air-to-air missile ever developed and ever fielded operationally. Just over 1,000 pounds of missile. The warhead itself is about 200 pounds. Huge warhead designed to take down Bear backfire bombers at long range before they can get to the ship. Contrast that with an AIM-9 Mike, which is a Sidewinder missile, close-in dogfighting missile, that has about a 2-pound warhead. So completely different missiles. Only airplane in the world that could carry it operationally. We could carry 6 of them. Generally, we didn't do that. We called that the 6-shooter. You would generally carry 4 underneath the airplane down there in between the engines. So 2 in the front, 2 in the back. It could carry 2 more out on the wing station, but generally you would carry a AIM-7 Sparrow and a AIM-9 Mike out on the wings for close-in dogfighting. So you'd carry 4 Phoenix, and that was a heavy load, 1,000 pounds each. And to bring that back on the ship, obviously, made the airplane pretty heavy. It was a super long-range missile, by far the longest range in the world, well over 100 miles. Still to this day, the actual range of it is classified. It was the only airplane in the world we had a radar mode called track while scan. So you could track up to 24 targets at one time and target 6 of them at the same time. So each missile could target its own bomber coming in. You could shoot 6 of them, and that thing would climb up to 80,000 feet and then come almost straight down on top of the bombers. In the last about 20 miles, it had its own active radar seeker in the missile. So it could then lock on by itself, because now it's out there pretty far, and figure out which bomber to go for. Pretty amazing system when it worked well.
Yeah, that's terrific. You'll hear a lot of movies where the pilot says Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3, but you don't want to say fire in an airplane. There's brevity codes are to let other pilots know that you're launching a weapon and to stay out of your way. So tell us a little bit about what those codes were.
So your Fox 3 was a long-range missile. Fox 2 was a radar-guided shorter-range missile like the AIM-7 Sparrow. And then Fox 1 was the short-range AIM-9 Mike. So that was a Sidewinder missile, which would be much shorter range. So depending on what you were shooting, you would call the appropriate Fox 3, Fox 2, or Fox 1. Trying to remember that in the heat of combat would always be kind of funny. Sometimes you'd hear people say the wrong thing completely.
Now, there's also Fox 4, but hardly anyone said Fox 4 because usually you just say guns, 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 because this is what we're looking at now. This is the M61A Vulcan 20 millimeter Gatling gun on the left side and had a fire rate of 6,000 rounds a minute, 100 a second. This is a 20 millimeter shell. Tell us a little bit about this. What was it like shooting something that was so fast?
Well, the amazing thing is you barely see anything of the gun. That's just the very tip of the barrel, that little blister that you can see. The gun is bigger than if you looked at a Volkswagen Beetle, put that next to it, the gun is longer and weighs more than a Volkswagen Beetle. It goes way back inside the airplane. It's pretty amazing. Holds 675 rounds, and as he said, well over 100 rounds a second. So you only had about a total of about a 6 seconds worth of burst, worth 6 seconds. So all you would do is squeeze the trigger and let it go. And in that 1 second, it would shoot 100 rounds or more. So it was pretty amazing to shoot the gun. We would often strafe, either when we're at land, we'd go out mostly in the desert. There's lots of target ranges out in the Southern California and Arizona deserts. The other thing we would do is when we're on the ship, the carrier would actually tow a target in the water behind the ship. And 4 airplanes would do a circle around the ship and come diving in at this target and shoot at it. And you purposely had to aim behind it because the gun was so accurate. If you aimed right at it, the first person would just sink it right away. And they would not appreciate that. So you would aim behind it. And it was pretty cool because everybody on the ship there'd be hundreds of people standing there on the ship watching. And they would be doing nothing but watching the 4 airplanes go around. And it was the best show on earth. The sound of a 20 millimeter Gatling gun firing is amazing. You would hear you would see the airplane dive down. You would see smoke come out of it. And at 1 potato 2, you would hear as the gun fired. And about a half a second later, you hear pop, 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 as the bullets were going supersonic and hitting the water. So it was pretty amazing to watch. And it was a lot of fun to fly that too.
Yeah. Also about the gun, now it had these big honking shells. You wouldn't want to be dumping these into your engine. So what happened with all the casings?
For the F-14, they were actually held internally, not ejected from the airplane. For exactly that fact, the gun being so far forward of the engines, if you ejected them out of the airplane, there'd be a chance that one could go down the intake, which would pretty much ruin your day.
Let's talk about the engines right now. This is a supersonic aircraft. It could fly more than 2 times the speed of sound. I think it was 2.35 times the speed of sound. That's more than 25 miles a minute. These engines, which in this case were Pratt & Whitney TF-30s.
Yep.
The thing about these engines, and it's kind of featured in the movie Top Gun a bit, but these had a tendency to have what's called a compressor stall, where if they weren't treated just right, or too much air went in, or not enough air went in, one of these would kind of fail. Talk about the compressor stall issue with Pratt & Whitney's.
Well, the engine was originally not even designed for the Tomcat. It came out of the A7, and it was supposed to be just an interim engine while they developed the airplane. Well, the Navy and its ways and money issues, as soon as they put the airplane flying and got these engines in them, they said, well, they already got these engines, we'll just keep using them. They were very underpowered for the size of the airplane. In military power, they had about 11,000 pounds of thrust each. And in Afterburner, they had about 17,000. 34,000 pounds of thrust sounds like a lot, but when your airplane weighs 72,000 pounds, it's not very much, especially compared to today's fighter that are much closer to 1-to-1. So the problem with the engine was it was very prone to having air get disturbed as it went down the intake, which would make the engine compressor stall. A compressor stall is kind of like the engine's coughing. It's no longer breathing correctly. So the airflow in the engine is disturbed. Well, if you have one engine producing full thrust and another engine not producing thrust suddenly, what could happen is it could put the airplane into a spin very quickly. And once it got into a spin, kind of like the movie Top Gun, poor Goose, once it started spinning, a lot of times it didn't stop. And that had a lot to do with not just the engines, but the body produced so much lift and it was so flat that it would start to spin flat in a circle. And once it starts doing that, you have no air going over the flight controls anymore. So there was no way to stop it. You could try, but generally it ended in riding the parachute at some point. So you had to kind of baby these engines quite a bit when fighting, especially. You're fighting, you're moving the airplane around pretty violently, which really disturbs the airflow going down the engines. So sometimes you would get a cough and you'd immediately pull the throttles out of Afterburner and hope one of them didn't develop a full compressor stall.
But this here, to kind of prevent that, they had these things called ramps. And tell us what these would do and how they would help.
Most jet engines, believe it or not, can't take supersonic airflow into the engine. It just won't run that way. They're not designed that. No jet engines are designed to run with supersonic air going down the intake. So the ramp that you see above it and the one that's flat that you can see directly in front of you, those things would, in flight, the faster you go, they would actually start to bend and come down into the wind. And they would divert air, as you can see, right out the top. And they would also slowly, I mean, you can see how big the intake is. It would close down to about that big in flight the faster you got. And what that did is actually created a supersonic shock wave right in front of that ramp. So the air, even though it's supersonic outside, would hit that shock wave and slow down to subsonic air before it entered the engine. So most airplanes, the F-15 has a very similar system. The F-18 does a few things kind of like that, but they have some sort of ramp or some sort of diffuser to keep supersonic air from entering the engine. It was all automatic. We had no control over that.
Also at supersonic speed, we have these are glove vanes. They're kind of inconspicuous, but tell us what these would do. These are hidden, and at supersonic speeds, these would pop out for aerodynamics.
Believe it or not, as you go supersonic, the faster you go, the center of lift of the airplane, where it's the airplane's developing most of its lift, would actually move aft on the airplane. So by putting the glove vanes out, it moves the center of lift forward and keeps the airplane in trim the faster you go. And again, those were automatic. We didn't really have any controls over them. Unlike the wing sweep, there was an automatic and a manual mode for the wing sweep. Normally, we would fly with the wings all the way out at 20 degrees. We could put them back all the way to 68 degrees, which is the iconic Tomcat kind of triangle you see. That is all the way back at 68. If you had them in automatic, the wings would stay all the way forward. So believe it or not, you were pretty fast. They would start moving back at about 0.95 Mach, 500, 550 miles an hour. They would just start moving back. And they weren't fully swept aft until you were doing about 1.2, 1.3 Mach. So it was pretty fast.
Oh, that's great. By the way, I'm reminded that we've got Kevin aboard as well. He was a mechanic on this aircraft. While we're waiting for Kevin, let's also talk about 25% of the lift came from the body. This was, I think we called it the tennis court up above. Is that right, Tim?
Well, that was a derogatory term because it was as big as a tennis court.
That's great. Anyways, it's a pleasure to meet you, Kevin, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your familiarity with this aircraft.
Okay, I guess just fresh into the Navy, got into VF-21 after the Constellation Westpac cruise, which I believe Tim was probably on. 160666 was in our inventory then. So I went right to the line shack and spent pretty much almost the whole 4 years in the line shack, taking care of birds like this. That's fantastic. This is the second airplane that I've found that's on display that I've actually touched. So when I was in, so
that's awesome.
This is really cool.
And VF-21 had a nickname for this airplane, didn't they?
Yeah, there was a few. I think it probably got a name everywhere it went, but the guys before me called it Beast, and then the guys in my line shack, we called it Damien. I think she was a little bit of a troublemaker for a while, but yeah, we crawled all over that thing.
These are the stabilizers of the Tomcat, where a lot of the roll control came in, as well as the pitch control, and they could move independently. But since we're at the tail here, let's talk about these engines. On the nozzles here, you can see these variable vanes here, and those are called the turkey feathers. They would open up wide for afterburner. Tell us how the afterburner worked on these aircraft.
Kevin can add a little bit about as far as the maintenance aspect of it. When you fly the airplane, if you go, what you would consider all the way down on the gas pedal, what we call military power, that's about 11,000 pounds of thrust coming out the back. When you went to afterburner, there were 5 zones, and as you pushed it forward, it would light each one. And with full afterburner, it's now about 17,000 pounds of thrust. But the difference is when you're in mil power, it's being fed by a fuel line that's about 1 inch across. And if you can imagine, when it's being fed by Afterburner, it's about 2.5 inches across the fuel line, that thick, and it dumps raw fuel right into the aft section where the flame is and lights off. And that's exactly what it does. It just dumps raw fuel in there, lights it off, and produces excess thrust.
This is your
Yep.
flying it.
Yeah, that's Black Knights. That's the squadron I was in.
Taken off in full afterburner. You've got a 3-foot wide flame on each side, 9 feet apart on center, and a 30-foot flame coming out the back. And that was a little bit problematic from what I understand in Navy terms, because it really calls attention to yourself visually.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons, in addition to the power that they, in later models like the B and the D, they changed the engines to the GE-110, which could take off in full military power without afterburner. And so you wouldn't have this big trail of flame, but it certainly made the liftoff a lot less pretty, in my opinion.
Yeah, the old A model was much cooler on takeoff.
The back here, one of the things you'll see in Top Gun is that when they start the dogfight, you'll see this quote unquote smoke coming out of the back airplane. Well, that's not smoke. This is the fuel dump, which I imagine is a pretty stupid thing to do before going into a dogfight.
Yeah.
We're at the beaver tail, and let's talk a little bit about what we'd have. Tell us what was in these sockets here that could help the airplane.
Those generally would be loaded with chaff and flares. There'd be 30 chaff and 30 flares. And chaff is simply a bundle. You could click it once and one would come out and it would explode behind the airplane and send out thousands of pieces of shredded aluminum behind the airplane. And what to a radar that would suddenly appear is a giant airplane. So you would shoot out a chaff. If a radar missile was locked onto your airplane, you'd shoot out a piece of chaff, and hopefully that missile would transfer lock from your airplane to the chaff. Flares were exactly the same thing, except they were burning magnesium, super bright, super hot, and it would do the same thing. When a air-to-air missile that's a heat seeker is locked onto your big old TF-30 engines, you'd pop out a piece of a flare, and that would fall back behind the engine and bloom, make a huge, bright, hot piece in the sky, and hopefully that radar or the heat-seeking missile would transfer again from your engines to that bright piece of sky. Problem is, missiles have gotten better. They're much better at discriminating what's real and what's not. It's not as effective as it used to be.
Well, Kevin, tell us a little bit about what it's like working on the engines for these, because you were an A&P for this too, weren't you?
No, I wasn't a mech. I was a plane captain in the line shack.
Oh, great.
Struck for structures, but I spent about 3 years in the line shack and then went to corrosion control. So I painted them for my last 6 months in Japan. But we would service oil, fuel on the ground, clean them up. We were the guys out there scrubbing them, diving the ducts, cleaning them up, making them pretty.
Kevin, did you take the Indy over to Atsugi?
Yes, I did.
So did I.
Yeah, I figured. You said it sounded like you were in the same time, so we were there together.
Exactly. Amazing.
Yep. Yeah, the best part about the plane captain job, though, was we got to launch and recover. So giving all the hand signals to the air crew and doing some final checks before takeoff and recovering the airplane on deck and on the beach.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's talk about that in a minute when we can start talking about the landing gear and the takeoffs with the catapult shot and all that. But yeah, that does sound like the Navy. If it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, paint it, I think is the rule of the day. So the tailhook that we're looking at here, because this is a carrier-based aircraft, this would be what would stop it. And there were 4 cables across the deck of the aircraft carrier that this would be aiming for. And you'd be, I'm sure, aiming for the third cable. And tell us a little bit about what it's like trying to do it. It was called a trap.
It's funny. People used to say it's like driving a car at night with no headlights on a mountain road and trying to come to a stop on a postage stamp. It was nerve-wracking sometimes. Again, the daytime, it was a lot of fun. We landed in the daytime visually, even at night. But you had on the left side of the landing area, there was what's called the Fresnel Lens. It was a lens with 3 green lights on each side, 4 green lights on each side that did not move, and a big round ball in the middle that went up and down. And that ball was your glide path as you came down to the ship. And all we were trying to do is keep the orange ball between the green lights. If you added too much power and went high, that ball would rise above the green lights. If you took too much power off, it would go below the green lights. If you kept it right in the center, hopefully you would land on the 3-wire, which is what they were targeting. So you're traveling at 145 miles an hour. You've got about 6 feet left and right, and you've got about 8 feet up and down in which to catch either the 1-wire or the 4-wire. If you caught the 1-wire, you were too low. You would catch a lot of grief from all your friends. The 2 and the 3 were fine. The 4-wire, you would roll out right to the end of the ship and sometimes look like you were going to go off the ship. It was pretty amazing. And people always ask, what happens if you miss all the wires? Well, every time you landed, as soon as you touched down, it didn't matter. You had no idea if you were going to catch a wire. So you would add full power, and you go to full power. And then if you caught the wire, you would roll out and the airplane would be at full power. And then you'd look up and they would tell you to throttle back, and you'd pull the throttle back and you'd taxi out of the landing area. If you missed all the wires, you were already at full power and the airplane would just fly away. And you try it again. We called that a bolter. So a bolter had to do with your landing rate, and you wanted to be in the 95% landing rate. So meaning at least out of every 10 passes, you wanted to get aboard 9 of them. They would allow you about 1 time to miss.
Right, and once you get 100 traps on a carrier, we call a centurion. Is that what the term is?
Exactly, centurion. You could get a day centurion, which is 100 day traps. You could also get a night centurion, which nobody wanted, but that meant 100 night traps. So I had about 300 night traps and about almost 500 day traps on the Indy.
Wow. So you're coming to a stop. I guess that's got to be quite a stop there when you're stopping, going from, I don't know how fast you land at to 0 in like 20 feet. That's got to be.
You'd be surprised. It's pretty violent. You go from 140 miles an hour to 0 in about 125 feet. It rolls out. That sounds like a long ways, but it's pretty violent. I mean, your head snaps forward if you're not ready for it, and you got to bring your head back up. Better lock your harness, or your head would actually hit the radar screen in front of you. I've talked to friends who've done that. So it's actually pretty violent. We call it a controlled crash.
But that's not the only G's you feel. And I guess as a reward for all those traps, you get the best ride in the world, which is cat shot.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about the Tomcat was that it would kneel at takeoff. And so if you're watching Top Gun, it really looks like a cat ready to pounce. And then I guess that would give a little bit of extra push with the oleo strut at the end of that, where they kind of help it push it up. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, the cat shot was pretty amazing. You'd be all prepared for it, and they would give you the run-up signal. You get to full power, and then they'd give you see it in the movies, open hand. That means zone 5, light off the afterburners. So you'd light them off, and the airplane would just be vibrating. It was unbelievable. The whole thing shaking. So the airplane's at full power, and you're sitting on a catapult, and the only thing that's holding it back is that little launch bar that you can see up underneath the nose. And that is holding on to the aircraft carrier. And when they're ready, they push a button, and that catapult, that's all it is, a steam catapult, would grab that little wheel and pull the whole airplane down the deck from 0 to 150 miles an hour in about 200 feet. And it really was like somebody standing in front of you and punching you right in the chest. It was pretty amazing. And in the daytime, again, it was always fun. You'd go right there, you do a clearing turn off the catapult, about 10, 20 degrees, and you get up to 500 feet and level off and fly out as fast as you could at 500 feet, which was a lot of fun. On the other hand, at night, it was disorienting. Every time, think about your balance. All has to do with the inner ear and the liquid in your inner ear. When you move your head, that liquid moves a little bit, and it tells you where you're balanced, up, down, left, and right. Well, that liquid in your ear would just get totally flipped upside down at night when you get a catapult shot. So you would go off and be 10, 12 degrees nose up, and you'd have to fly on the instruments because you can't see anything, but your body is telling you you're at 50 or 60 degrees nose up. And you had to really fight the urge to want to push the stick forward, because if you did, the water's right there.
So now when you're launching, are your hands, what are you doing with your hands in a catapult shot? Are you on the controls, or
yes, the Tomcat's different than the F-18. The Tomcat, we would just put our hand behind the stick lightly. And as you went down the catapult, if you watch any films of Tomcats launching, both stabilizers went like this as they got into the wind. And as soon as you launched off the deck, the nose would pitch up, and that's what helped the nose come up, was those. So the stick would come back in your hand. The Hornet, on the other hand, those guys, you'll see them with one hand on the canopy rail like this. They launch and don't even touch the controls. Once they get airborne, then they grab the stick and start flying. We would make fun of them for that.
This one is double nuts, so it's got a 0-0 on the tail. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Usually they call that the skipper bird. It would have either the CO of the squadron or the real bigwig, the carrier air group commander, the CAG's name on it. Everybody always asks that. There's generally about 12 Tomcats in each squadron. So they were numbered 0001 on up. Kevin's squadron was the 200, so 200, 201, 202 on, and ours were the 100. So we were 100, 101, 1. And people would always ask you, oh, do you always fly the same airplane? We rarely flew the same airplane. It was whatever was available that day, maintenance wise and cycle wise. And your name would be painted on one airplane. You may fly that once in a while, or you may never fly it. You never knew.
I love looking at this airplane, man. It's taken me back. I worked on that very airplane, and it's just it's pretty neat.
When we were young.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to get down there and see it.
Since it's Top Gun Day, and I'm sure you saw the movies, what do you think?
It's the greatest movie you love to hate or hate to love. I like the movie. It's got a lot of really great flight sequences. Lieutenant Commander Galpin, he was in my squadron. He flew in the movie. Yeah, Flex. I strapped him in many times. He was in the movie. You know, it was one of those things. If at the rec center at Miramar, if someone rented it, they were usually brand new, and we'd all join in and then just tear it apart right in front of them. But I think we all loved it.
As far as a movie is concerned, it was spectacular. I thought they did a great job. They made it understandable. They made it approachable for most people. It was a great recruiting tool for the Navy. I mean, it was unbelievable how many people joined after that. And let's be honest, it's probably one of the greatest big budget flying movies ever made. The Navy has Top Gun. The Air Force has what's that ridiculous F-16 movie they made?
Iron Eagle.
Iron Eagle, there you go. One of the worst movies ever made. So, hey, at least ours was well done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again, gentlemen, not only for your service to this country, but also for joining us today to tell us all about this amazing aircraft, certainly my favorite tuned aircraft in the world. And Hope you enjoy the movie. Hope we get to talk to you soon. Bravo Zulu, gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Kevin, it's funny we both were there at the same time. That's very, very cool.
Yep, it was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, man. Thank you for your time.
That's it for us here at the Oakland Aviation Museum. Stop by if you're ever in Oakland. We're open Wednesday through Sunday from, I think, 10 in the morning until 4 p.m. And we've got a lot of other fine aircraft. And until then, stay safe and happy landings to everyone. Bye-bye.